Sean Haney here with realagriculture.com and Real Ag Radio, Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. And let's talk weather. I know farmers are always interested in weather, especially as we enter the really the heat of the harvest season. And we're already starting to look ahead to next year a little bit as well. We're joined right now by Andrew Pritchard. He's a meteorologist with Nutrien. Andrew, great to chat with you again.
I am so happy to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Okay, let's start. Let's start in central and eastern Canada, and we've had some unusually hot weather here as of late. I saw something on the news: people out in kayaks in the Great Lakes and enjoying some pretty high temperatures. But there has been a lot of concern about that corn actually getting to the maturity stage because of the lack of sunlight through certain parts of the year. What are your models showing in terms of what we can expect here for October, November from a weather perspective in that region?
Yeah, absolutely. The same pattern that's been experienced up there is what we've enjoyed down here in the Midwest of the United States. I took the dog out for a walk this morning and was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and I'm just like, this feels like summer. And that's the way I've kind of been framing it, and in doing so, framing it as maybe our last week of this really summery weather, because we are going to see a big pattern shift as we head into this weekend, and it looks like that is going to hold on for at least a couple of weeks as we go deeper into the middle and end of October. And so with that is going to be a big dive in our temperatures. We're going to see some cooler temperatures settling into the region. We're also going to bring some moisture into the region as well. So a little bit of an increase in shower and perhaps some thunderstorm activity. And then unfortunately, bringing the cloud cover back in. So it's going to be a big pivot, a big sudden pivot from like sunny, warm weather to much cloudier, cooler, and gloomier weather. So you'll really see that shift begin over the weekend. That's when we'll see a front come in. Really, I should say at the end of this week. It's like Thursday into Friday, the front sweeps in. It'll bring a bigger area of showers and storms. And then the upper level low kind of merges with, now we're seeing the remnants of Tropical Storm Philippe. And that just kind of sits there and spins over the next 7 days or so. So we could see those pesky showers lingering in some cases into early and mid next week. And then we start looking into, the week 2 time frame, and we're already starting to see maybe things reloading with another storm system coming in. So it looks like we start to begin this maybe more typical fall cadence of bringing a storm system in, once every week or two. And then some of those, they have the tendency to kind of sit and spin is what we like to say. And that leaves that kind of cloudy, cool, gloomy weather overhead. So that's what we have in the near term. And I know that's going to be frustrating to some as we kind of, bring an end to the sunny and warm weather. So this, wide open harvest window, not going to just run on, unimpeded in October. I think, we'll still see some stretches of warmer weather, but definitely a noticeable shift in the next 7 days.
Kind of pulling us back to the average of what we can expect. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, and that's what we see as we kind of try to look, into weeks 3 and 4. And we know that we're in a period of really low predictability as we start looking out beyond week 2 with El Nino and other competing factors. That's just kind of the nature here as we go into a transitional period from summer into winter. There's a lot of chaos there. And so with that can come some of these bigger pattern shifts. So this is what we got over the next 2 weeks. Looking deeper out, we see things kind of near the average. So, you kind of hit it there. We'll see some warmth, but get some variety in there.
My perception is that was hurricane season kind of slower this year on the coast, or I apologize if I have totally botched
that. It's been a weird year because we did come into it, with kind of a shifting forecast here with a, higher than average forecast, but then maybe a slower start in some of the areas. And so there's been some competing ideas with, really warm ocean temperatures supporting a lot of activity, but then at times higher than normal wind shear across the area. And so that's kind of worked against some of these storms. And certainly once they have developed, it's kind of worked against them working their way northward up along the coast. So it's been kind of curious that we've seen some of these, we've seen a landfall here across Maine and then, coastal Canada, and we may see that happen again here as we get it toward the weekend, early next week. But you're right, it's been kind of an unusual hurricane season, but we're kind of right in the middle of it. And there's certainly, reasons to believe we could still see another, pulse or two in terms of tropical activity. So it's something that we're continuing to monitor. And that's one of those big wild cards that we, again, we have to look at in 1 to 2 week time increments. But we know that one storm could really be disruptive to the pattern across North America in terms of moisture and the overall storm track. So it's something we're monitoring closely, at this time of year.
So what I'm hearing is back to that cloudy, kind of more traditional, gloomy kind of weather, gray skies, but it's going to also bring some harvest moisture, which could provide some challenges as people are trying to roll through the field.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is kind of the story from Ontario. And then again, I'm kind of tying it all together, bringing it back to the Midwest of the
Yep.
US. We're kind of riding this pattern shift together. Definitely a shift that's going to, bring to an end this wide open period of dry, warm weather and bring some moisture. And in some cases, some areas need that moisture, but it is frustrating as we get into harvest season. We'll have to kind of dance around these bigger storm systems.
Yeah, feels like fall football weather.
Absolutely. Yep.
For sure. Okay, all good. Okay, let's jump to the western side of the country, where for the most part, maybe not as much Manitoba, but I think still to somewhat of an extent it is true. Saskatchewan and Alberta, really dry, and even parts of Saskatchewan where things looked more promising from a moisture standpoint at the beginning of seeding season, we're back to where we started a year ago. And we've been talking, I've been saying it, the audience has been saying it, we need some fall moisture.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any hope?
There is some hope, and that's kind of the story that unfortunately I've been telling going back to the end of the summer, and we haven't yet seen that hope materialize. I want to kind of not traffic too much hope, but the good thing here is we've gotten rid of La Nina. And when we kind of look for correlations between prairie drought and some of our bigger ocean, teleconnections, we do see that La Nina is commonly associated with some of our more significant drought across the Canadian prairie. And we just ended a 3-year long period of a strong La Nina that, kept fading and then coming right back. And so it kind of fits that we've seen, 3 rather frustrating years in a row in terms of prairie moisture. And you're right that each of the past 3 years has had a flavor of its own, where, some areas have been drier, some have then seen relief, but overall it's been a period of frustration in terms of moisture there. So as we get rid of La Nina, we remove one of the biggest instigators of drought across the Canadian prairie. So that's where I kind of have some good news is as we go through the fall, the winter, into the next growing season, we don't necessarily go into next growing season with the deck already stacked against us. Now, the other side of that is we don't necessarily stack the deck in our favor by flipping to El Nino. As we look at El Nino, there's not a strong correlation between a sudden push towards high moisture, high storm track across the Canadian prairie. So I would say exercise some caution, or some patience maybe is the better word here. I think that we're going to move in the direction of improvement across the prairie, but I think instead of talking about doing it in 6 days or 6 weeks, it's probably more like 6 months, on that kind of time frame. So we start to get to a better background state, one that should support more in the way of storm systems making their way through. But we know that it's 3 or 4 specific storm systems that are going to bring that moisture to the region to replenish things. And we can't see those specific storm systems yet to know where that is. So, the thing that gives me optimism here is, again, El Nino, that typically favors a stronger, more consolidated jet stream across North America. When we see a stronger, more focused jet stream, that typically means stronger storm systems, more in the way of moisture. When we look at La Nina, we're typically talking about a split jet stream, weaker flow, and that's what's really kind of had a void of impactful moisture. So that stronger jet stream, it gives me hope, but typically in the winter, that's focused further south. That's, usually across the southern US is where that active storm track is. So a typical winter with El Nino across the Canadian prairies is going to be usually a little more mild without that stronger northern branch of the jet stream. We're not talking about bringing as much cold air in, but without that stronger north jet stream, we're not talking about, typically high impact storm systems either.
So opportunity for you tell me if I got the geography right, but opportunity for Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, Montana to get some snow more so than say, the Western Canadian prairies.
Sure. Yep. The further south you go, the higher your odds here are typically with an El Nino pattern. But again, every El Nino is different. There could be a wild card here or there that pushes that further north. And we saw that with the precipitation over the summer. I don't want to get sidetracked too much, but we're going through April, May, and June thinking we were going to get rid of the drought across the Midwestern United States with this very strong flow from the jet stream. And we ended up with a blocking pattern across Eastern North America that forced that storm track south. And so it was areas, several states in the US further south that were getting that heavy rainfall. So again, we can adjust our expectations, geographically north or south by hundreds of miles sometimes. And that's usually because of some kind of wild card that we weren't able to anticipate. So, there's reason for hope, but we gotta get there. And right now there's no strong indication of when that's going to happen.
Yeah, that's my understanding. That I've learned that in this transition from La Nina to La Nino is we know when it like officially starts and stops, like, okay, the transition, like it's happened, but we don't, it's really difficult. And one person told me impossible, but I'll let you comment on that, to know when the effects take place.
Yep.
Okay,
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 100% sure. And I mean, you could look at the pattern right now and there's arguments over whether or not El Nino is really driving what's going on at this current state. There's other players that are certainly factoring in. So you're right. We can say, hey, El Nino is going to be strong, and that's usually a big driver, but it does not mean it will be the driver, and it doesn't mean that it's going to behave the way that, hey, we've got 6 or 7 examples over the last 100 years of a strong El Nino, so it should, fit that bill. No, the truth is they all have their own flavor. So we don't necessarily have hey, this is the El Nino storm track. It's just we've got some ideas. We can start to formulate what we think should be the theme of the upcoming season here. But again, we're not looking at the actual storm track or the actual storm systems that are going to bring the weather that we're going to be impacting and that will really tell the story of the season.
Yeah. So if we get, kind of a mild winter in Western Canada, which means not a lot of snow, puts a lot of pressure on that La Nino effect for spring.
Yeah.
Because we're going to have dugouts in trouble, pasture conditions. Like there's going to be a lot of pressure on Mother Nature to come through once we get to March, April.
Absolutely. No, I know it's a tricky situation, one where I feel like I'm seeing light at the end of the tunnel, but I also know that it's going to be an anxious wait until we actually get to that point. And there are, other dominoes that may fall if we don't get that moisture to come in sooner rather than later.
When we look at the North American complex, just the entire, Canada, US geography, what are you most interested in watching through these winter months? What like geek out here for me for a second to wrap up. What are you looking at?
Yeah, so a couple of things. I mean, a lot of it comes to moisture, not just across the Canadian prairie, but we're dealing with some severe moisture loss here in parts of the Midwest and the southern United States. And that's really impacted, the Mississippi River is a big topic right now. We're seeing, getting close to record lows, and the forecast is not good in the near term for moisture there. So that has a high impact on shipping. And with a pattern that could theoretically be dry heading deeper into the fall, that's certainly going to be something that we'll be watching closely. But the flip side of that, with El Nino and that forecast for, a period of stronger jet stream flow, my mind, when I see periods of high flow in the jet stream coming in across the central US, I always go to severe weather and start to look at, hey, we're going to be bringing some high impact storm systems in here. We typically associate that more with spring, but we can sometimes during the transition from summer to winter see another period of high activity for strong storms across the central and southern United States. So it's kind of an exciting period here where, again, we're kind of coming out of the summer doldrums where it gets a little boring forecasting the weather in the middle of the country here. And as things are kind of stagnant with the slower, weaker jet stream. And, the weather has reflected that. It's been very hot, sunny, and boring locally. So I know with, a more active weather pattern comes headaches and that kind of thing. But it's exciting as a meteorologist to kind of have the possibilities so wide open heading into another transition period. So whether it's the tropics, big storm systems coming into the middle of the US, or just kind of anxiously waiting and watching the drought situation from the prairie into the Midwest and the Central Plains, it's a really fascinating time to try and see what questions will get answered and, what questions we don't know that we have, at this point going deeper into the winter.
Well, Andrew, I really appreciate you joining us here today, and we'll definitely check in with you through some of these winter months and get a bit of an update on what are some of the indicators as we flip the calendar to 2024. Andrew, thanks a lot for joining us here today. Really appreciate it.
Happy to do it. Can't wait to talk again.